Hi, I'm Nick Bolton, the founder of ICCS. And today, in this Bitesize Knowledge piece, we're going to take a look at one of the major models of coaching supervision, indeed, supervision in general. And that is the seven-eyed model. And this model was created by Peter Hawkins and Michaud back in around 1985, I believe. But it really has stood the test of time. And over the last, 40 years, it's become a bedrock of how we think about supervision and the areas that we need to look at in supervision. In this video, I want to break it down at a high level, and then in subsequent videos, I'll take a look at each eye specifically to look at what are we investigating when we look through the lens of that eye. And that's an important word I've just used there, which is look through the lens. This is not a linear model. We don't work from I1, I2, I3, I4, etc. until we get to 7, and then we're done. It is not like something like the GROW model in coaching, where you work from the goal through to the way forward, or the will, call it what you will. It's rather a map. And at any point you say, well, what's the part of the map we need to be looking at here? When I first came across this many years ago, it baffled me, I must admit. I don't know why, looking back, because it's actually pretty simple. But for some reason, when I first read about the seven-eyed model, I was like, this is baffling to me. It seems so unnecessarily complex. And so what I hope to do in this video is simplify it and enable you to see that, okay, so this is really just a way of looking at what are we looking at? What specific areas of this coaching relationship are we looking at here? So let's take a look at it. We mentioned that there are 7 eyes. In fact, there are 8, but one of them is a sub-eye, and I'll go into that a little bit later. Let's quickly name the eyes, and then we'll take a look briefly at each one. So I1 is the client, and we'll come back to that in a second. So who is the client? Then I2 is what's being done with that client. In other words, what's the coaching work? In a coaching supervision context, what is the coaching work that's being done? What models are being used, and what processes and interventions, and so on and so on. I3 is the relationship between the coach and their client. And what is the nature of that relationship? And what does that say about what's going on? I4 is the coach's personal experience of what's happening. So how are they feeling about it? What's their experience of the coaching that's taking place? I5 is the relationship between the supervisor and the coach, particularly with a view to pulling out parallels that might be happening between the coach and the supervisor and the coach and the client, or the client and the system they're part of, the work environment, the familial situation, whatever it might be that the coaching is about. I6 is the supervisor's personal experience of what's going on. How are they feeling? How are they noticing what the experience is like for them? Now, I mentioned there was 8th eye. Before we come to I7, let me introduce the 8th eye, which is I6A. Now, I6A is actually a superbly useful eye, but it's often forgotten about, probably because it's called the seven-eyed model, so we forget there's an 8th one. But I6A is the fantasy relationship the supervisor has with the client. In other words, hopping over the coach to the client. What are you feeling about the client as a supervisor? How do you experience them? Always remembering that you have no direct contact with that client, unless you're in a very unusual situation in coaching. You have no direct relationship with that client. You are hearing the filtered version of that human being through your coach, but you then develop a fantasy relationship with them. You might have positive feelings towards them, negative feelings, neutral feelings, whatever. That's I6A. And then finally, I7 is the systemic lens, which is looking through the work at the level of what are all the forces that surround and influence this coaching that's taking place. And that isn't only the direct system. So in other words, let's say the coaching is taking place in an organization. Yes, one part of that system is the organization. But there are many other factors that come into that system, including who does that coach affiliate with? If they are affiliated with the ICF, or the EMCC, or the AC, or nobody at all. Even that is a part of the systemic lens that you might look through to say, well, how are you being affected as a coach by the system you're part of? So those are the 7.1. Those are the lenses that we look through when we take a look at the seven-eye model. And I want to talk now briefly about how it's used in practice. Look, I mentioned at the start, it's not a linear process. It's not something where you go, right, let's bring the client into the room. Now let's look at what you're doing with them. Now let's look how you feel about them. Now let's look at how you feel about the process. No. Whatever's coming up in that supervision will bring stuff to the fore, rather like Gestalt psychology or Gestalt therapy, let's say, where you think about the background and the foreground and what's figural at any given moment. So in supervision, something will become figural. It will become It'll become in focus. And as it comes into focus, we can start to think, well, what are the most important attributes of this here? What might be a useful way to look at it? Is it about who that client is? I1. Is it about how you feel about the coaching that's taking place? I4. Is it about what you're doing? I2. Is it about the quality of the relationship that's happening between you? I3. Is it about what's happening between us, supervisor and coach, right now? And why do I feel a certain way? Why do I feel a certain way? I6. And how might that be part of what's going on between us? I5. So as these things become figural, we start to notice what might be a useful area to work. We are not going through in a linear fashion. That said, what I notice with supervisors is they tend to have preferences. Now, when a coach first becomes a supervisor, they often have a preference for I4. And that's understandable because a coach has been taught and habituated to focus on the person in front of them, right there, that client. So when a new supervisor starts to work with a coach, who's right in front of them? The coach. And so there tends to be a habit often in new supervisors of focusing on that person, the coach. How are you feeling? What do you want to do differently? How would it be for you if ... etc. That's I4. Now, over a period of time as a supervisor, you really want to be beginning to reflect on where are my preferences? Do I find myself drawn to I4 most of the time? And if so, why? Is that because the person's in front of me and it just becomes easy to look at them? Am I forgetting the client? How often do I bring the client into the room metaphorically? How often do I say, hey, let's get that specific human being into this conversation so we can understand how they might be experiencing the coaching or what they're getting from it? How effective is it for them? Are they getting what they thought they were going to get? How are they experiencing you as a coach? If you do some Gestalt chair work and you put yourself in the shoes or the seat of the client, what's their experience of you as a coach? Do they find they're being done to, or do they find they're being partnered with? Do they find they are having a specific approach to coaching thrust upon them because you're an existential coach or a positive psychology coach or whatever it might be? That would be to bring in the client's experience. But then you might also notice that certain attributes of what's going on in the coaching is specific to the relationship that's being created. In other words, does that same thing happen with every client? No, it doesn't. So what is it about that client that seems to be configuring this outcome? Or does it happen with every client? Is it indeed not a relational thing, but a coach thing? Is it about what the coach brings to almost every client without fail? So we can start to see that by having these lenses that we can look through, we can start to bring stuff out that might be important or that might not be important. We might look through a particular lens, rather like an optician. We drop the glasses over our eyes and say, is that more clear or less clear? Does looking at the coaching relationship make it more clear or less clear? And when we start to think in those terms, then the 7-eye model just becomes an incredibly useful framework to look at what's being done. It isn't a process that demands an outcome. It's simply a way of looking at the work that enables you to make sure you're touching upon every aspect over a period of time to make sure that you are seeing the full picture. For instance, it can be very tempting to look at I4, I1, and I3 in isolation. In other words, wow, now we're working relation. Now we're working on the coaching relationship. Okay, but what about the system? To what extent have you looked at the impact of the system, the sponsor of the coaching, or the people in the family around that person, or the friends around that person, or whatever it might be that's affecting the outcome of the coaching? So all of a sudden, the lens 7, I7, becomes very important, but can be easily missed if we forget to look over there, if it becomes part of the dark corner that we forget to go to. So part of the journey of a coaching supervisor is to learn to self-reflect and to really think about, what did I look at? What was my predominant area of focus? Is that something I can stretch? How do I begin to broaden my comfort zone with these eyes? I hope that's been a useful exploration of the 7-eye lens, the 7-eye model. In future videos, I'll go into each one specifically and what do they mean practically. So when you're looking through the lens of I1, the client, what are we looking at? What does it mean to bring a client metaphorically into the room, and why? Why bother? Well, there's lots of reasons, and we'll go into those in future videos. Thanks so much for watching this one. See you on the next video.